Hello class and welcome to the last video for this chapter 8, and we're going to talk about the extremes of intelligence. I hinted on the extremes of intelligence in the first lecture slides where we talked about the bell curve and the normal distribution of IQ scores. So we're going to get into the types of extremes of intelligence. There are two extremes of intelligence. On the lower end of the bell curve, the normal distribution of IQ scores, we have children that have intellectual disability. And we also have on the higher end of the normal distribution, the higher end of the scores, we have something called giftedness. And we're going to talk about those extremes of intelligence. The first on the lower end of the extreme of intelligence is something called intellectual disability. Children or adults that have an IQ that is below 70 usually are diagnosed with something called intellectual disability. But as I told you all, and I continue to say in this section of in this chapter 8, how IQ scores are not the only thing that must be used to determine children's intelligence. In order to be diagnosed with intellectual disability, yes, you do have to have a IQ score of 70 or below, but you also have to have difficulty adapting to everyday life. And a test that actually tests or tries to understand your ability to adapt to everyday life is something they test for, something called ADL. And ADL stands for your activities of daily living. If you're not able to complete your activities of daily living, then that means you have difficulty adapting to everyday life. And if you also have a low IQ score, a score below 70, more than likely, the psychiatrist or the psychologist may diagnose you with an intellectual disability. Additionally, you have to display a low IQ and have difficulty adapting to everyday life before the age of 18. You have to exhibit these before you exhibit the age of 18 in order for you to be diagnosed with intellectual disability. And as you know, with intellectual disability, you have to make sure that as the child is growing up, that their needs are met in school and at home. So the diagnosis is very important to unlocking different things that a child may need in order to help make their life easier. On the other side of intellectual disability, on the other side of the bell curve, we have something called giftedness. And usually people that are gifted, they have an above average IQ, and their IQ usually falls between 130 and above, or they may also have a superior talent. In order to be said that you have giftedness, there are some things that must happen. There are 3 criteria. For example, if you are unusually advanced, if you usually need minimal help, and you have just this passion to master, again, also having this IQ of 130 or higher, or the superior talent, then that is when you are diagnosed as something called gifted, that you are called gifted. A lot of times children that are gifted also need minimal help from adults, and their learning is usually effortless. They're usually very able to pick up on quickly things that they know well. Last week we talked about Vygotsky and we talked about scaffolding. And what occurs is for gifted kids is that gifted kids don't usually need a lot of scaffolding because they like to solve problems in their own way versus having a parent or a teacher or another child help them understand and usually do it on their own. Okay, so let's watch this short video about Noah Gray KB. He used to be on My Wife and Kids, but now he's currently on a show called All American. But we're going to talk about his giftedness.
Ripley's, we like to tell stories about the most unbelievable people from around the world. Noah Gray KB is one of those people. He has been called a mini Mozart because of his piano playing ability. And when we learn that he plays classical masterpieces just by watching his father's fingers, he made it tonight's Ripley's Kid. Noah Gray KB appears to be your average 7-year-old kid who loves riding his bike and playing with his dogs. But this second grader is also a musical virtuoso, blowing away most adult piano players by leaps and bounds. And believe it or not, Noah can't even read music. He plays intricate concertos by ear. Noah first became interested in the piano when he was only 18 months old, banging out tunes on a toy keyboard. But at the age of only 3 and a half, Noah told his parents he didn't want to play with a toy anymore.
One day he just stopped me in his piece and said, "Dad, I don't know to play the piano, am I?" He said, "Nobody in here knows the piano. I'm just faking it." I'm like, "Well, yeah, but that's okay." Well, I don't want to fake it.
He, insisted that Sean teach him. And so Sean did that. It was kind of, he forced her hand.
And although he was surrounded by a musical family, not even his siblings could have guessed how talented Noah would turn out to be.
At first, I really didn't think it was him. I thought that Mom and Dad were trying to pull a joke on me.
I was a little taken back when I first heard him play because his feet were just dangling.
It was really amazing. He was just sitting there playing the piano with these tiny hands, and the fingers were about that big. It was really cool.
I get up and sometimes go to the piano and play it just because I want to play. And I only play the piece that I like the most.
When he was 4 years old, Noah had his first encounter playing with an orchestra in Washington, D.C. Shortly after turning 5, he toured Jamaica and then Australia, performing as a soloist.
I want to play music for other people as much as I can because then it makes them happy and they can know what it's like to play an instrument.
Unbelievably, Noah has to learn all of these complicated pieces by ear because he doesn't know how to read music.
That is very interesting. Noah Gray KB. He, like they said, he was able to play these complicated pieces just by hearing his dad play and by watching his dad's fingers. So yeah, he's definitely gifted. And like I said, he was on My Wife and Kids. He's been on an Oprah Winfrey show playing, and all of this was done. He had this precociousness at a very young age. So that's just a good example of giftedness. So of course, the age-old question, giftedness, is it nature or is it nurture? Obviously, yes. There it is nature and it's also nurture. A lot of times, yes, we talked about how we have all of these genes that influence our intelligence, and yes, obviously that is still the same with giftedness, but also giftedness has to be nurtured. And when I say nurtured, that means that giftedness has to be surrounded by a strong family support and years of training and practice. The key with giftedness is, yes, they have this ability to do these beautiful things, but there has to be some type of deliberate practice in order for children to hone in on their giftedness. So we talked about intellectual disability, we talked about giftedness, and now we're going to talk about creativity. And so when we talk about creativity, That is just being able to think about something in an unusual way. So you may be able to solve a problem in an unusual way, a way that may not be documented previously, but you still come to the same answer. So that would be an example of creativity. And so when we talk about creativity, there are two types of thinking. We talk about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And when we talk about divergent thinking, that means that there are many answers to the same question. Many answers to the same question. So that would deal more with divergent thinking, because creativity is where you're trying to come up with different, unusual ways to solve problems. Or you can have something called convergent thinking, which means that you're producing one correct answer. And when we talk about intelligence tests, that is asking you to produce one correct answer for each question. So it's not, intelligence testing is not really trying to understand your creativity. It's really trying to make sure that you answer this one question one way. It's always going to be the same answer. So check your understanding. If you are asked to answer a question and you are instructed there's only one correct answer, you might logically conclude that the item is assessing A, creativity, B, divergent thinking, C, general intelligence, or D, convergent thinking. I'll give you a minute to come up with the correct answer. Okay, did you all say that the answer was D, convergent thinking? If you did, you got the answer correct. Because, as we said in the previous slide, convergent thinking produces one correct answer. So the answer is D, because the question is asking there's only one correct answer. Even this check your understanding question is an example of convergent thinking, because I'm only saying there's only one correct answer. And in the question itself, there's only one correct answer. So the correct answer is D, convergent thinking. Okay, that is it for this chapter 8, intelligence. I hope that you all have learned something and are able to apply what you have learned to your daily lives. I'm particularly interested in what you all are going to write in your discussions for the week, and how the different types of intelligences, and what way do you think that you are smart. I'm excited to read about your different skills. I'll see you all on the next video slide. Bye bye.